measure that what is the average time it is taking to do that every step, what is the standard deviation, etc. For example, if you see a step, sometimes for some people it is taking just 1 hour and some people it is taking 2 days, then you have a very large standard deviation. So which may mean that there is some problem with that particular step. Similarly, you can also do the trend of the cycle and activity times so that you know that whether your overall time is improving or is it is just the same, or it is actually not improving, it is actually becoming worse. So you have to work on those matrices, and then you can fine-tune all those bottleneck areas. Now, as I said, that your process definition is iterative. That means you're changing the process. So the changing the process itself is sometimes very critical because the process is running at any point of time, and then you have to change the process. So one of the questions you need to ask that how much change is really I'll be doing so that whether it will be necessary to retrain all the people. So often you may don't want to do such a big change that you have to start from the scratch once again. So typically, smaller changes are much more palatable, much more easy to implement rather than a big change. Also, when you have the process, you should be able to do the versioning of the process. That means you should be very well documented that why you have changed the process from version 1 to version 2, version 2 to version 3, etc. So you know exactly what are the changes you are making. Now, what happens to those items which are running the previous version of the process as you are implementing the new one? So the typical convention is that the older items still follow the old process, and all the new items start following the new process. But sometimes what may happen that you may have to actually start the older items also with the newer process. In some cases, you have to do that. So your tools must be able to actually take care of all these different kinds of functionality. Also, when you are starting an old item with a new process, should we skip some of the steps because they have already been done? So your tool must be able to handle those kind of situations. Now, in Kovair OmniProcess actually supports the versioning and process lifecycle. So let me actually show it in our tool how it looks like in our process designer, as a matter of fact. So this is actually our drag and drop process designer. Okay. So if you look at it here, first of all, it shows a version 4.0, which basically means that there are 3 versions, and we are really talking about the 4th version. And also, there is a life cycle of the process here. So you see here, design, debug, and publish. So at this point of time, the version 4 is in the design mode. On the other hand, the version 3 is an active process which is running at this point of time. So if we, when we change the version 4, it is not affecting the version 3 anyway. And then we can go into the debug mode to test it. And once we have tested and we are satisfied with the version 4, we can publish it. And when you publish it, version 4 becomes active and the version 3 becomes inactive. So that's the kind of life cycle of the processes as it goes through. And as I said in the previous slide, that actually Kovair process allows you to restart an item with a new version, okay, all the items, and you can even start at a middle point. So for example, all these different steps we have, so we may decide that the new items will start from this particular point because all the previous steps are already done. So Kovair actually allows you to do that. All right, so let me go back to the presentation once again. Okay, now empowering the end users, that's actually a very important thing. Is that you know that there are many, many tools which allows you to do the process. Actually, there are very powerful ITSM tools which allows to do almost anything you want to do. But one of the big challenges of that is that to implement those processes, you have to get the IT involved, to code it, to test it, and all of those things. So basically, who knows the process best? That is the end users. That is the people who are actually using the process. But unfortunately, in most of the tools, they are not allowed to actually create the process. You have to get the IT resources, the developer, to actually code those. And often things are lost in translation. So making the end users the owner of the process and basically they doing the process development has a great, great benefit. But for that, actually, your tool must be able to kind of handle that, because if your tool needs a lot of coding, your end users won't be able to do it. Now, to have an end user development platform has an advantage that you don't need the IT, and often the IT does not have the time, and they are not interested in to make some small changes. And at the end of the day, empowering the end user is the fastest way to solve a business problem, and then the success rate is higher. So this is how actually you do it in Kovair, that Kovair OmniProcess, the one the designer just shown you, empowers the end users with a drag and drop visual designer so that you don't need any kind of coding at all. So let me quickly show you how it looks like to do that. So for example, here is the designer, and let's say I am adding a new activity here. So I just drag and drop here, right? And that actually opens up a pop-up window where I can select what kind of activity I want. So for example, let's say I want, let's see, review the final KB article, I'm calling that. And this one is, these are the owners, and these are all the different roles involved in that, right? So I'm putting it for IT Service Desk. That's it, and save it. So here is my activity. Let's make it a little bigger. And then using this, I can make a connection with this one. And that link, actually, I can make it a conditional also. You see the traversal condition, which means that if that condition is satisfied, then it will flow through that particular path. But in this case, I'll just make it unconditional, and then I'll put it from here to end. So this one is also an unconditional one. So now I can make it look a little better here. I'll just move it here and like this, right? So what I just did is added a new state to my existing process. And this is how, just like a Visio, I'm just drawing it. And as I'm drawing it, actually all the logic, all the semantics, all the processes in the back end are being created. And we can actually automate that. We'll know actually much more when we learn it from Jo, how she has actually implemented her process. And one other thing is very important. I want you to understand that process is not just the steps and creating this workflow. Process is what are the attributes you're using, what are the forms you're using, what are the groups of the people you have, and what kind of form they would be able to see, what kind of reports you have. All of them together actually makes a process. I have just shown you the tip of the iceberg here, which is the workflow, which is the kind of core of the thing. But as Jo will tell you, that really the process is the combination of all these different things as you create it, and that makes a successful process implementation. So that basically ends my portion here, and I'll just quickly go through the quick critical success factor. One is keep a room for mistakes. So what happens is that if you're creating a workflow, let's say you have to categorize an item, that's an incident. What kind of incident? And if you categorize it as a mistakenly something else, it will possibly follow a path which is a wrong one. So your process must be able to take care of those kinds of mistakes. Also, remember, there is no ideal process. Sometimes people kind of spend hours and days and months to create an ideal process, but there is really no ideal process. It's really an utopia. One of the reasons is that as your business condition changes, whatever you thought as an ideal process becomes no more an ideal process. You have to change it. Also, you have to keep room for the manual process. People try to make a process with all the exceptions, thousands of different kinds of exceptions as possible. Then your process becomes really, really complex. But if you have a room for the manual override, in that case, you don't have to take care of all the exceptions. And finally, keep it simple. Simpler the process, easier to implement, the chances you'll be successful will be more. Okay, so that basically ends my portion. So what we'll do actually, that after Jo completes her portion, we'll open it for a question-answer session. In the meantime, you can use the question panel at the bottom of that GoToWebinar window to submit your question. Okay? So Jo, let me hand it over to you now. I'm changing to you.